Welcome to the good, the bad, and the sequel Q&A. My name's Doug. So the next sequel that we're be covering is a really good vigilante, kick-ass movie. Substitute 2, School's out, Behringer's out, and Treat Williams is in the lead role for the next 3 installments, and love it. Upgrade. I love Treat so much. He's perfect for these movies. He just he kicks ass. Lots of ass. And it's got B.D. Wong, and this week's guest plays Danny Branson in the movie, and that's actor Edoardo Ballerini. Eduardo, what a great, love talking to him. Just his journey was not like others into wanting to get into this business. We talked about a movie that you think of his roles, he always had like darker hair. So you think like The Sopranos, Boardwalk Empire, 24, you name it. He always has like darker hair. So I was mind blown when Jamie said, "Oh, I got somebody for the substitute." And I'm going through the IMDb and I see the Pest. And I'm like, "Oh, okay." And I click, I'm like, Himmel, who's like one of the main characters in the movie, maybe because he's blonde, he has a German accent, but that's Eduardo. And that movie is such a staple of my childhood. And like you'll hear Eduardo say, so many others were in the same bracket as me, is renting this a lot, watching this a lot. Me and my neighbor, Stephen Feliciano, and I watched it like a month ago. And I still know almost every line to the movie because that's how much I watched it. But yeah, Eduardo was great. So many great stories from his career. And so many, he took an opportunity, auditioned for something, or just really took a leap of faith, and then something came from it. So many times in his career, and he loves the craft, so it was a lot of fun talking to him. Before I start the interview, please, if you're new here, subscribe, share, follow us on all social media at Sequels Only. And then, of course, on YouTube, you can watch the unedited interview, and there you can subscribe as well. Subscribe there, it really helps us out. Just not only, it's not like I'm or Jamie are like, man, me, we want more people to see me. I really just want people's stories to get out there, because that journey to the first credit in the early days, I think it's not something that people talk about a lot, and people enjoy it. And so does this week's guest, actor Edoardo Ballerini. Enjoy. So Eduardo, this is going to be so much fun because Eduardo, so when I emailed you, I'm sure you were like, probably some of the credits that I mentioned, people don't talk to you about more. But what I like to always do is to find out, people's story, like that journey to the first credit, because I think just looking up and down someone's IMDb, things you probably had people do before. But I'm so interested because this is such a rare career, because the failure rate to be in Hollywood, whether in front or behind, you have to be a special kind of person, and in a good way. You have to be determined. So how did it all begin? Are you from LA? You grew up in LA?
No. Okay. So, all right. My quick backstory. I was actually born in LA, but I grew up in New York City.
Oh, no way. Cool.
My father's Italian. My mother's American. So I grew up in New York City and then in Milan, Italy. So I, bilingual, dual citizen, all that kind of stuff. So I was back and forth as a kid. The acting thing didn't really start until much later for me. That was after I graduated college.
Really?
I was kind of bumbling around. I was like, what the hell am I going to do? I'd done some acting as a kid, but in that very, sort of unprofessional kind of way. And never did any in high school, never did any theater in college, none of that stuff. And then somehow after I graduated from college, and I was like, what am I going to do with my life? I was like, let's give this acting thing a shot. Why not? And what you alluded to earlier, is interesting, is that this, a resume like mine, and it's probably actually not all that different for most people. It kind of bounces around from like project to project, and like big thing, tiny thing, big success, total disaster, comedy, drama, like whatever, and I feel like that's actually most people's careers. But what we tend to see and remember is the more popular stuff, the hits, and then obviously as the years go by, stuff gets kind of like swept away, and like people forget about movies and stuff. But it's interesting, sort of what you do is you sort of remember the older stuff, It's like, let's not forget about those things from the 90s, or
Yeah.
the early 2000s
Heck
or whatever
yeah.
they were.
During the video store, like growing up in Jersey, like that was the thing in the summer. Like my dad was a garbage man. He had the illegal cable box. So we'd get whatever movie on there, but then it'd be like, all right,
Right.
here's $2. Go to ride your bike to the video
Right.
store and just go. And I used
Sure.
to just go up and down and then so many different movies. One of the ones we'll talk about, which is so funny that because it's
Yeah.
such a staple. But you said like after college, you were like, let me try this acting thing. How did you come to that decision? Did you know somebody that was doing
All
it
right.
or?
All right. So I'll dive a little deeper on this.
Yeah.
So I was in Italy, and I was I was on my own. I just graduated college. I was bored. I was lonely. I was broke. I was all this stuff. Uh, and I literally, I'm not making this up. I saw an ad in a paper that said like American actors wanted because they were forming this like expat theater company. And I was kind of like, you know what? Sure, screw it. Let's see what happens. And so I joined this group of Americans, but literally for about a week. And I just was sort of like, well, this is interesting because they're people here. I'd kind of imagined my life as a writer, maybe an academic like my parents. Um, and then I was like, oh, this is kind of fun. Like there's a group of people. It's interactive. You're working together. You're not a writer like, back in the day, like with a typewriter.
Yeah, like
quite
Hemingway.
literally,
Yeah.
Exactly. And, in your basement by yourself. So I was like, all right, this is cool. So I moved back to New York. I kind of took some classes just to see what would happen. And then parts started coming. And it was a weird kind of journey. And I have a feeling you'll be surprised as to how some of these movies came along.
Cool.
And I know you want to get to some of them specifically. So
Yeah, but so it makes sense. You're in New York. You're taking some classes, and your first credit, Law and Order, in '95.
Of course. I mean, I feel like if you are a young actor in New York in the 90s, you have to do Law and Order, right? Yeah, I did Law and Order. One episode, played an autistic kid. This is my first part, and didn't have any lines, but was central to a few of the scenes, and very nervous. And I'd actually just gotten out of the hospital because I'd had pneumonia.
Oh my God.
And I'd been in the hospital for 10 days. And then I went to this audition, and the way TV works, you probably know, it's very fast, right? Like you get called in for an audition and then like 3 days later you're on set. And so I was like sickly and pale, and I think they were just like, all right, this is the guy. And I remember, it's a funny thing because I asked the director, Matthew Penn, why they'd cast me. And I had no resume at that point. I'd done nothing.
Yeah.
And so literally my resume was like, my name, my height, my weight, and like my pager number or whatever. And I did put down where I'd gone to college, which is a place called Wesleyan University in Connecticut. And Matt Penn was like, I went to Wesleyan. And I was like, and I figured you could probably handle it. And I was like, wow, okay. So that's how it works sometimes. It's like, I knew you're probably a smart guy. You'd do your homework. You'd show up prepared, I was like, all right. And that's how it kind of kicked off.
Wow. So how much longer, like the credits after that, are you already out in LA, or are you still doing everything out in New York? Like
no,
Paul Bearer?
I was in New York.
You were still?
Yeah. That's all in New York.
Okay.
All that stuff filmed in New York. Those early movies where I had small parts. What was there? I shot Andy Warhol.
Paul Bearer, 5 Dead on the Crimson Canvas. I'm Not Rappaport.
Oh yeah, right. I'm Not Rappaport. Yeah. These were literally movies where I was in like 1 or 2 scenes, but they all filmed in New York, and I didn't go out to LA until after that. And I kind of went out just to see. I had some friends out there, and they were starting to make their way in the industry, and I was like, oh, let's see what's happening in LA. What's this all about? I hear they make movies here, and one thing kind of led to another. And I have a feeling I know which credit you're going to ask about in a second. Yeah. So no, because there's a very funny story about how that happened.
Yeah. So the one, and I don't even think I could say it in email form enough without saying it, like expressing it this way. That movie, for me and my neighbor, Stephen Feliciano, when we were growing up, we watched that movie so many times, The Pest. And to
Yeah.
be honest, so like 2 years ago, we did, I think, it might have been right after Treat Williams passed away. I went through like, oh man, it'd be
Right.
cool to watch a bunch of his movies. So like Dead Heat, the
Sure.
Substitute sequels, and I go through them, and I'm telling you, you could have, I cannot believe it's the same person.
So I get it. Thank you. I take that as a
Oh,
compliment.
yeah,
I've always thought of
100%.
myself. I've always thought of myself as a character actor, and I'll go from film to film, and they'll be very different. So The Pest, which is funny because you'd be surprised at how many people say it was such a part of their youth.
Yeah.
That movie, that they had the VHS tape, they watched it till it died, and they saw it 1,000 times. They knew all the lines, all that stuff. So here's how that happened, and it's very strange. I met this casting director in LA. His name was Ross. I can't remember his last name. And it was on one of those what they call general call, where you just sort of go meet the casting office just so they can know who you are. And he was like, listen, I'm casting A Midsummer Night's Dream, the Shakespeare play, for Lincoln Center. Would you like to audition? And I was like, I'm not a Shakespearean actor. I'm not really much of a stage guy, but sure, why not? So I go out to this soundstage in Burbank, and we tape a monologue of me doing Puck, like the character. And I'm like, all right, that's the end of that. Then I go back to New York, and he was like, listen, you have a callback for Lincoln Center. So you're going to go meet the whole Lincoln Center theater people. I was like, what are you talking about? So I go to Lincoln Center. I'm on this stage. I'm meeting their artistic director, the director, all this stuff, right? To do Shakespeare. I've never done Shakespeare. Long story short, I do not get that part, which was probably a good thing. A couple of months later, I'm back in LA, and the same guy, Ross, was like, listen, I'm casting this comedy. Would you be interested? And I was like, I don't really do comedy, but sure, let's give it a shot. And he's like, all right, so come meet me. And he gives me an address, and I go there. And I figured, now in the world of film, casting usually happens. You get, a first read with a casting director. They put you on tape. They show it to the producers, the director. If they like you, they bring you back. So I'm figuring that's what this is. I go in, door opens, and there's John Leguizamo. And there's Paul Miller, the director. And they were all there in the room. And I was like, oh, I guess I jumped to the callback stage, right? The fact that I almost got the part at Lincoln Center doing Shakespeare has gotten me the callback for this thing. So I go in, I read, and I'm like, all right, okay. It went fine, nothing out of the ordinary. And I'm leaving, and remember, this is a time before cell phones, any of that stuff. So I walk out the door, casting director's like, listen, hold on a second. And I figured he just wanted to say nice job.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, okay, whatever. So I leave. I get back to wherever it was I'm staying. I check my answering service, because that's what we had back then. There's 6 messages from the casting director saying, where the hell are you? Get back here immediately. They want to see you. They want to work on this stuff together with you. And I'm like, what? And I'm convinced to this day, the fact that I left is why they offered me the part.
Really?
Yeah, because they're like, oh wow, this guy doesn't even care.
Yeah.
He doesn't even care about this movie.
He's too cool for this. He's convinced.
Perfect. Exactly. He's perfect, right? And then it happened. It's not a great film.
No, yeah.
But I had a really fun time making it, I have to say. Everybody was cool. We shot in LA. We shot in Miami. I was flying around. I was staying in hotels. I was on set. It was like, this is fun.
Yeah. And if you're a fan of movies, I know at that point, John Leguizamo he's obviously in things, but just given your age, Jeffrey Jones, obviously what happened after this point. Yeah. But before this, when you're working with him, this is the go-to comedy villain of the 80s and 90s. Yeah. The guy. Sure. So Leguizamo gets him. And I could not believe that was you.
Yeah. And they dyed my hair blonde, and they were doing a German accent and the whole thing. Yeah. It was a strange part. So, I start by playing an autistic kid. That's my first part. Then I have this big role in this comedy. Again, I'm not a comedy actor, where I'm blonde and doing a German accent. And so all of a sudden, even at an early age, I thought, well, maybe I have some range here. Maybe I can do a bunch of different things. And that has kind of come to define my career. Like I've done, if you look at my whole body of work, it's like every character is different, which I'm proud of.
Yeah, that's more
I'm very proud
fun.
of that.
I'm sure. Like
Yeah,
it's like,
it
hey,
is.
what do I
It
got
is.
today? You open up the script and you see like
Right.
a different character.
Right.
But at that point, why
Yeah.
didn't you want to do comedy? Was it just the training you did and you're like, I want to be this type of serious actor?
Yeah. Look, I enjoy comedies. I just didn't think I was a comedic actor. I didn't feel like somebody who had that timing. I didn't feel like somebody who had that broadness to it. It wasn't exactly the material that when I went home, it wasn't the first thing I went to see.
Yeah.
Wasn't comedies. I was looking at the dramas. And so yeah, but I really had a lot of fun on that one. And I learned a lot, I have to say. It was like, it was a fairly big production,
Oh yeah.
not huge, but it was big enough. And I really got to see how a Hollywood movie was made. And that was very important to me at the time.
Yeah, to soak it all in. And it's like any comedy,
Yeah.
like sometimes a serious actor could be the most funny. Like a Leslie Nielsen
Right.
take it, the way he
Oh, sure.
and just the way you played that role
Right.
was very funny. And then sometimes you would break after your character would, like when Leguizamo would kind of like snaky wakey
Right.
or
Sure.
such a wild movie.
Right. I know I don't think they make that movie
I don't
today.
think they do either. No.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think they're allowed to. But yeah, so that's
Yeah.
what's so crazy. And then you have these other roles, like just going in that order. So at this point, you got to think you go to school and then after college, you're thinking, maybe I'll try this acting thing. At this point, like 2 or
Right.
3 years in, are you already,
Right.
this is the
Yeah,
rest of my life?
I guess it's a funny thing in hindsight. I remember so at this point I'm in my 20s, I'm in my mid 20s, and I remember thinking like, oh man, it's too late to do anything else, which is so stupid,
Yeah.
right? Like if you're 26 years old, it's like you're at the beginning, right?
Mhm.
You could do anything. But I remember having that thought. It's like, well, I've been in a movie, I've been in a TV show, I've been in this other stuff, I'm working, I'm auditioning, like, it's too late to try anything else. So I guess I better stick with this. And that's kind of how I stayed with
That's
it.
why.
Although like most actors, like every few years you start thinking like, what am I doing? Like, is this really my life and career?
Yeah. You just get to pretend.
Yeah.
You get to pretend for a living.
Yeah, I know. And then something, if you're lucky, and I do count myself as one of the lucky ones, something always comes along, right? When you feel like, oh, maybe I've hit the end of the rope here. It's like, this is the end of the line for me. Something else comes along and suddenly you realize you've been doing it for 25 years.
Yeah. And you get rejuvenated. I'm sure you get to, like you mentioned, like that point, and then it's like, oh, this once in a lifetime role that was meant to play comes along, which happens early on throughout your whole career. Every few years, it's something really, really
it's
big.
something different.
Yeah.
I think that's what's kept me going. It's like every few years, something different, something big, something unexpected comes along. And it's been that way, for, as I said, for 25 years. It's like I could go down the line and say like, this wasn't expected, this wasn't expected, this wasn't expected. And they all came along. So I feel very fortunate.
Yeah, no, definitely. And like the movie that we had sort of like reach out to you for was like The Substitute 2, School's Out. Sequels. And it's Treat Williams, which is usually a lot of the times with those sequels that the first one does so well, the second, when they try to just throw out the sequels, the main actor is somebody that's so like lower. I don't know how else you want to say it, but you did like Treat Williams, who's like to me above Tom Berenger. Tom Berenger's a pretty good actor, but Treat Williams is classic.
Yeah, Treat Williams is sort of a legend, and I think I'm not a Treat Williams scholar, but I think at that point in his career, he was dipping. He was, and I know he came back strong with a bunch of other things after that. I don't think he was at the height of his game and career and powers at that moment. But I agree with you that, to put it in some context, the whole idea of the sequel, Once Upon a Time, was like, you just kind of spat them out, right? Unless you were very high end, like Star Wars, right? Where they were making like great movie after great movie. the world of sequels, if you think about like the sequels to like
Hmm.
Jaws, let's be honest, a bunch of the Rocky
Oh
movies,
yeah.
like they were just kind of like just slap the title on it, put some faces in it, and let's go.
Yeah.
And so with Substitute, which the first movie was a hit,
Oh yeah.
and Tom Berenger and Diane Venora and oh God, who was oh my God, the singer who was in it. Mark Antony, right? He
Oh
was in it,
yeah.
like all these people, right? So then they come along and they're doing, all right, Substitute 2. And they get Treat Williams. And I have to say, at the time, you're absolutely right. It was kind of a thing. It was like, oh, all right, okay, let's see what happens. And that was another one where I had a lot of fun. Stephen Pearl directed it, and it was a pleasure to go to work every day. I didn't actually do a lot with Treat. Uh, I mean, we crossed each other on set all the time, but I didn't have a lot of scenes with him, the way the storylines worked
Yeah.
out. Uh, but I remember him being very warm and very friendly, and uh, so it was another one where I had a great time with him.
Yeah. BD Wong, in the earlier parts of his career,
That's right, BD Wong.
he was
That's
already
right,
like in
BD
Jurassic
Wong.
Park and another number of other things. But yeah, no, you're right. You're definitely right about the sequel. It's usually like for the most part, like in name only. Maybe
Sure.
like one of my favorite sequels because I think they're so over the top are the Death Wish sequels. And like in the
Oh my
first
God, yeah.
movie that people,
Right.
again, because people don't really care after a while, but like in the first movie, he's a pacifist and he doesn't want to
Right.
hold a
And then
gun.
right.
And he uses like a roll of quarters in a sock to attack guys. And then in the third one, he's using
Right.
like
And by the end,
submachine
right.
guns. Yeah.
Right.
So it's funny, like,
But I think
yeah.
I think the art of the sequel has changed, though. I think now the sequels are taken much more seriously.
Oh yeah, because they can't get them wrong. Because then their whole
they can't get them wrong, right? And now it's like the whole idea of a franchise, and that you have built-in audience, which is very important to the studios, and they will go out and try to get bigger and bigger and bigger stars to come into franchises that are doing well. Obviously the Marvel universe is its own beast, but if you think about it, they're essentially sequels.
Oh no,
right?
they are.
You have an original movie, and then you just keep adding movies, but they keep adding like big name after big name after big name, and the money gets bigger and bigger on the effects and everything.
Yeah.
It's definitely a different era. We used to sort of joke about sequels, right?
Oh yeah.
They were like
how do they make a
bottom
sequel to
feeders.
that? Like the House and House 2. Like House 2 is a movie about just a different house. No connecting stories.
Right.
Amityville Horror,
just next door.
Yeah, it's back then it was like they can just churn them out. But no, nowadays you never see a commercial for a movie, rarely, and you're like, oh my God, they're doing a sequel for that? Because they really do. They can't waste that money. They can't do the old formula of let's do the sequel, cut the budget in half. Hopefully, the people that love the first one will go see it. But the sequels are quite interesting.
Right.
Yeah,
I agree.
So not to go up and down your IMDb, but again, like it's like all of these great credits. You have like the Last Days of Disco. You have Vig. So again, it's working. Like you said, like sometimes it's one or two scenes, but then boom, a big movie, Romeo Must Die. At that time with like Jet Li, that was a big movie.
That was a big movie. I don't know if we were number one at the box office or came in just second, but I remember it was a big movie. And that was another one that kind of happened sort of randomly. It was, again, I knew the casting people at Warner Brothers, and they were like, well, we're doing this action movie. There's this part, we don't really think it's for you, but why don't you come meet Joel Silver, who's a legendary producer. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll go meet Joel Silver. Why not? So I go into Joel's office, and Joel's office is this like cavernous office with all of these, movie memorabilia things. And Joel's a very, engaging guy, and he's got a big personality. And he's a guy who gets right to the point. And I remember we're sitting there, and within like a minute or something of this conversation, he was like, so, the part of Roth is like, what do you think? And all I remember, I was still in my 20s, I guess. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I remember it saying like, well, you got the CEO of this big, multinational company, whatever. I think it'd be really interesting if the guy was really young, and I just left it there, and I could see them like kind of going like, huh, yeah, they'd pictured it as some like silver haired guy in his 50s, which is how it was written. And I was like, I just think, some of these guys, they're in their 20s. They're like running these big companies. Like, there's pre-tech sort of boom, but it was the same idea, right? It's like, let's just get some young,
Yeah.
arrogant
That's
guy.
it.
He'll be there. And I just saw them kind of go, huh, all right. And then off we went. And it happened, and the next day they were like, yeah, they really liked that idea. Let's do it. I don't think I even auditioned for
That's
that,
amazing. Just throwing out an idea,
which is very strange.
I
I just threw out an idea, I was like, yeah, sure. Why not? And they went for it. And it was another one. I got to say, we shot up in Vancouver. I had a lot of fun. It was a great experience. It was a great time. Cast and crew were lovely. I remember Aaliyah,
Yeah.
and she passed. She was in that tragic plane crash, but I remember spending an afternoon with her in Vancouver, her and her brother who also died, and she was just so sweet, and it was like this afternoon that I'll never forget. She took me shopping for clothes.
Nice.
Because I told her like, yeah, it was fun. I came up and I ran into her on the street. I was looking at these sort of like vintage thrift stores, and I was like, I thought I was only gonna be here for 2 days, but they changed the schedule, so now I have to be here for a week or something. And she's like, oh, and it's like, I don't have any clothes. And she was like, oh, come with us. And she and her brother were going shopping. And I remember we just would go into these like boutiques and stuff and get some clothes so that I had something to wear for the week.
That's cool.
And she was very sweet. I'll never forget that.
That's an awesome memory. That's really cool.
Yeah.
And that's a big thing to work with, like like a Joel Silver. Is there a particular movie or a show that you worked on that you think is like we just talked about, like Tree Williams? Like, where is the one that you felt like, oh, this is the one that took me up? Was there like a role that you played or a series you were on? Was it like 24, like playing?
24 was actually interesting for me. A lot of people noticed that, and what happened, what was interesting is that people don't realize this, but 24, so they were going to shoot 24 episodes. They got to episode about 16 and the ratings were terrible.
Really? I don't know.
It was not a hit. It was not a hit out of the gate. It was a cult hit. People who loved it, but it was not like, this was network TV, it was Fox, they needed big numbers and it was not getting them. Then I believe Kiefer Sutherland won the Golden Globe or an Emmy or some big award for his role, and people started paying attention. And it was exactly at the same time that my character showed up. So I think I'm in 3, maybe 4 episodes. I don't remember how they edited it. And so it was like people started watching the show. He won the award. The ratings started happening. I showed up, and people remembered that character. It was again. Listen, in this business, you got to get lucky.
Yes.
Sometimes, there's just no way around it. Like I can't plan for that. And so that actually got me a fair amount of attention. At the time, I was actually spending some time in London. I had a movie called Dinner Rush, which was kind of a cult hit, and it was doing really well in England. And 24 over there was like Boffo hit. I mean, it was like a crazy hit. And I remember being in London when my episodes were airing, and it was like it was that brush with like, wow, some people live like this every day, where you'd like walk down the street and everybody'd be like, ooh, him. And I'm like, whoa, me? And they're like 24. And I'm like, oh, right. Okay. So I got a little taste of that. But if there's a series that kind of, is bigger than any other for me, it was certainly The Sopranos, where I didn't have a huge part again, but it was a character that everybody noticed and remembered. It was so different. It was that junkie, Corky Caporale, who got Christopher, back on smack, and he screwed up the hits and all this stuff, and it was just a character that everybody, I put it this way to people sometimes, like, so The Sopranos was it 80 episodes, 82 episodes, right? So you figure that's like 82 hours of content.
Yeah.
And I'm probably in those 82 hours for about 15 minutes, right? But everybody remembered those 15 minutes. So it was just like, again, there was just something about the timing of it and how it landed. And it's one that, I mean, to this day, people will write me and ask me about it. And it was a very cool one. Again, an amazing experience, just to be on that set, because I showed up in season 6, so the show was
Oh
already
yeah.
a massive, massive hit. Yeah, I mean, they had bodyguards for all the principal cast. I mean, it was out of control. Well, actually, it was under control, I should say, but it was really big. And I remember, like, you couldn't go from the makeup trailer to the set without a bunch of bodyguards walking, Michael Imperioli, or certainly Jim Gandolfini. Like, there were police barriers everywhere. It was pretty wild to be on the other side of it.
Yeah. That show was huge I remember my dad loved that show. Like, even from the first episode, and I felt like it had such a following. I don't know what they did press wise, like before the first episode even aired. I remember it just having, just from the beginning, it was like that show that everybody would watch and
It
talk
kind
about on
of
Monday.
it really, yeah, it became this like appointment viewing, right? It was like everybody knew that 9 o'clock on Sunday or whatever it was, like you were going to watch this show,
Yeah.
and it became that show. Uh, yeah, but it's amazing. And now it has this whole other life. There are a few shows. So I recently had the experience of teaching at my old college. I
Really?
taught
That's
a class.
awesome.
Yeah, it was fun. Anyway, I went back, and so these students are, 19, 20, 21 years old, and they all knew me from The Sopranos, which I thought was really surprising.
Yeah, that's true.
So it was after they were born, right? Yeah. And they're like, "Oh, no, we all watch The Sopranos." I was like, "What?" And they're like, "Yeah, they watch The Sopranos, they watch Friends. That, like, won't go away." And those seem to be the one drama, the one comedy, like they all watch those shows. So it's having this whole second life.
Yeah, it's like The Office too. Like Michael Scott always Michael Scott, Steve Carell always jokes. He's like, I felt like nobody watched in the first 6 seasons. That's what he's always said, because it just seemed like it wasn't as crazy as it was like after the fact. So I think that's maybe the one good thing about streaming versus, because there's obviously
that gives people the opportunity.
Yeah, to rewatch stuff. And then obviously there's like there's some negatives about streaming but
sure. It's funny, at the top of this hour when we were talking, I was suddenly remembering, like, when you'd go to the video store and you would see what they had.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, if they didn't have it, you weren't watching it.
Oh yeah.
And so you'd be like, if you're like, "Oh, I wanted to see Die Hard, but they don't have it, so I'll pick up, Substitute instead," right? And that's how you'd find the movie.
Yep.
But there's no other way to find it.
And it was a way to watch
completely
different movies.
Experience.
You got to think how many times.
Oh, it forced you to.
100%. You, like, now I can go on to any different streaming thing. If I'm not into it for 15 minutes, which isn't fair for the movie, because maybe it's a slow burn.
Sure.
But back in the day, it'd be like, all right, that's what you bought. That's what you rented. Yeah. So you're going to watch it. There's no reason not to. There's so many movies I've watched before that I don't even know why I watch them, but sometimes they'll like come on or something. I'll be like, I know this movie. I don't know. It was probably that. My dad was like, you're going to watch this because we're not going to watch the same thing that we already have.
No, I remember sitting through movies all the way to the end, even though I hated them within 5 minutes. But it was just like, I guess we're watching this movie.
Yeah, that's what it was.
So we're going to watch it. But now it'd be like, oh, forget it. Moving on, Like, I don't think I've ever walked out of a movie in a movie theater, even though sometimes I wish I had. But it's that same idea. It's like, you made the effort. Like, you went to the movie theater, you bought the ticket, you bought the popcorn, you sat down, you're going to watch this thing. And it felt the same way. It's like, you went to the video store, it was pouring rain, you got this movie, you came back, you popped it in. There's nothing on TV. This is what you're going to do. Right.
It was a beautiful experience, because there was so many movies that duped you by amazing box cover art or the description on the back. Or I remember like in Jersey, we had like Palmer Video and Easy Video, and they even had in the corner, like, maybe the new releases, but you could watch the trailer on the TV in front of you, and then you'd be able to rent the movie. But it was like, it's so weird my wife's a middle school English teacher in Jersey, and just her
Okay.
trying to explain like these.
Yeah.
It's really not that long ago. Like really, when you think about going to the video
It's
store,
no, it's not. It's not. But it is a
it
lifetime
is. Yeah,
ago
no,
as
that's
far as the
exactly what it
experience.
is.
As far as the experience goes, the same way that I remember being, a kid before the video store, and it would be like, all right, what's the movie of the week,
Yeah,
right? And there'd be like some James Mason or some Humphrey Bogart movie, and it's like, I guess this is what we're
yeah,
watching.
yeah,
Like, there's no other
yeah, yeah.
choice, right? And I remember seeing a lot of old like black and white movies when I was a kid, just because that was what was on.
Want to shop Walmart Black Friday deals first? Walmart Plus members get early access to our hottest deals. Join now and get 50% off a 1-year annual membership. Shop Black Friday deals first with Walmart Plus. See terms at walmartplus.com.
Yeah.
So
I have a whole
completely
stack
different
of
experience.
laser discs
And I get
that I don't have up yet. I only had the Back to the Future
Do
Part
you?
2 one. My buddy saw them on the side of a road. And so he
Wow.
grabbed them for me. What's crazy is there's a movie in there. I'm not going to go through it now, but it's a movie that came out in 1999. And I'm like, that is wild that laser discs were still being made at that point. Because they weren't.
Wasn't there a moment where everybody thought Laserdisc was going to be the
Oh,
high-end
yeah.
version
Early
of the...
90s was like, I remember
Right.
even to rent one was like so
Yeah.
much more than a regular VHS.
All right. I never had a Laserdisc player. My friend did. And I remember they were huge. They were
Oh,
like albums,
yep.
right? They're like these big things. And he would treat them almost with like white gloves. It's like, oh, this is the Laserdisc, it's going to be amazing. But then you're probably watching it on a crappy monitor with crappy speakers.
Oh, yeah.
So it probably killed part of it right there.
And you have to stop the movie
know.
halfway through for the most part. A lot of them had
right,
a
you have to
second
flip-
side.
you have to-
So we just
You have to
stop.
flip it over like a record.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
That's so funny.
Oh, man.
Well, now one of the weird things is that not only is streaming exists, but if you're an actor like me, pretty much everything you've ever done is always
Yeah.
available, and which is good and bad, I suppose. But it does mean that at any given moment, if somebody wants to watch something, if they want to go watch 24, they want to go watch Sopranos, they want to go watch The Pest, whatever, boom, just hit that search bar, type it in, it'll show up, it'll tell you where to find
Yeah, I
it.
know.
Which is pretty wild.
It is.
You know?
It's really wild because I don't know if you ever talked to any actors or had this conversation about people from like the 70s and the 80s, but like when I talked to even directors then, just because it was before like the video store boom of having VHS tapes.
Yeah.
I've talked to directors that
Sure.
said, when I was done with this movie, I never thought I would even hear of it again. And he's like, here I am 30
Sure.
years later talking about it. Is
Yeah.
that something that you ever thought about when you were working? You're like, you did a movie, you're like, man, nobody's going to see this or.
Definitely. Absolutely. I mean, when I first started, I remember talking to an agent early on, and I remember I submitted my resume and they had it in their hand. And at that point I had a number of credits. And I remember asking sort of naively, it's like, well, what do you do when, because, the paper's only so big. It's like, what do you do when somebody has too many credits? Right. And I remember, I'll never forget it. He said, we just start peeling them off. We just start peeling them off. I was like, oh, that would make sense. Yeah, you put your recent best stuff at the top and, then the rest of it, he's like, the rest just disappears.
Yeah.
Nobody knows about it. I was like, now it's IMDb,
Yeah.
and it's like nothing disappears, right? But that was his sort of attitude. And I guess that was sort of the industry attitude. It's like, you can do some schlocky film and 5 years later, nobody's going to remember it. So why don't you just take the paycheck, do the gig, go home, pay your rent, whatever. And now it's like, no, that's there forever.
Yeah, it is.
But I've always been somebody who I've had, we've talked about it. I've had a career that's sort of gone to different corners of the industry, big movies, small movies, comedies, dramas, whatever. But I've never once been somebody who's wanted to like hide any credit in any way. I kind of feel like, what, I did it. This is the work I did. This is the path. This was the career, and so be it. I do have friends who are kind of like, ugh, I hope people don't know about this movie that I was in. It's like, why? You know,
Well, people are going to find it. Even when people
everybody's,
go on their IMDb or like have their
yeah,
name removed, it still has it on there. It just says uncredited.
right. I know. I always felt like, it's like, just own it.
Yeah.
It's like, so maybe that wasn't your favorite movie. I get the one area where I'd get it, I suppose, if maybe like you were young and you did something that was a little racy
Yeah, I
and you
guess
didn't
so.
want to
Yeah.
do that. That I could understand. I'm not talking about like porn
Yeah. Yeah. No, I
necessarily,
didn't
but
mean.
if you did some, some like sort of steamy scenes, they're like, oh, I wish people wouldn't see that. I get.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
But if it's just like a movie that wasn't great, it's like, just own it.
deal with it.
It's fine. Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
So at this point, it looks like this is where I don't know how the voice acting started, or if there's other voice credits that just aren't on here. But was the first one you did, was that Batman, the Brave and the Bold, or were you dabbling?
So for animation, yeah. I haven't done a lot of animation, but yeah, I did that. But really, the voice stuff is more in the audiobook.
Oh, well, you have a great voice. What books have you done,
well,
or what
thank you.
authors?
Oh my God, I've done so
Really?
many. Oh yeah, I mean hundreds. And so that happened quite by accident. Somebody came to me and was like, would you like to record an audiobook? And this was right around the time when Audible had launched. The iPhone had just launched, and so the technology was there, and they were kind of looking for actors who might be able to do this. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'll give it a shot. And I kind of liked it, and then it took off, and it really became the bulk of my work for a long time, to the point where I was in a show called Quarry for HBO, which I had a 5-year contract, but the show was canceled after year 1. And so and at the same time I was doing all this voice work, and I was like, and I had kids who were young back then, and I was like, oh, you know what? The stars are aligning here. Let me do some voice stuff for a while. And so I did, and I pretty much walked away from screen acting. I thought, well, I did that. That was cool. It led me to this other thing, which is great. And then I got a call to be on the Hulu series, Murder at the End of the World, which was last year. And what was crazy about that is they offered me the part because they were fans of my voice work. So for people who've seen the show, they'll understand why my character is both on screen and off screen. You sort of hear him. He's the AI assistant. So you hear him in the walls and stuff, but you also do get to see him. And so they were like, oh, we love this guy's voice. Let's cast him in this role. And it just felt like a great example of like, you don't know where something's going to bring you, so it's like the TV stuff brought me to the voice stuff, and then the voice stuff brought me back to the TV stuff. And now I honestly don't know what's next. We'll see.
It is crazy to think about the 2 ways that you've gotten jobs were from a Shakespeare monologue led you to the past. Right. And then somebody listening to audiobooks and saying, man, I love this guy's voice. Let me see who it is. Yeah. Does it say in the beginning of an audiobook, if I listen to one and say, oh, you say narrated by?
Yeah.
Okay.
Narrated by, yeah. It's, but you're right. I mean, for people who are in this industry or want to go into this industry, you do have to accept that there is so much unknown and so much unpredictable and so much that is uncontrollable. And as you rightly point out, right, some guy saying like, hey, do you want to audition for this Shakespeare thing? And I don't think he had any idea that I would get a call back. He was just like, he was like, I'm meeting this young actor. He seems interesting enough. Let me just tape him on this thing. And then suddenly Lincoln Center was like, hey, we'd like to see that guy. And he was like, oh, all right, maybe there's something to him. And it became something. So recording some audiobooks and somebody listening to them, writer, director, with a new show saying, oh, who is this guy? I want to bring him into my show. You just don't know. And again, it's like, I don't know what's next exactly, but I have a feeling it's going to be another strange thing that leads me to it.
Is there any other facet? Because I know you said you've thought of yourself possibly being like a lonely writer with a typewriter somewhere. Have you done any writing? Is that something you've ever thought of? Or
That's a great question. I have. I've written some screenplays.
Oh, no way.
None of which got. I did make a short film, I should say, that I co-wrote with somebody. That went to Sundance Film Festival, which is great. And then I wrote some screenplays, but none of them were ever optioned. And then I co-wrote a story with a guy named Jess Walter, who's a very established writer. I met him through the audiobook world because I narrated his books. And then he and I collaborated on an Audible original. Excuse me. So that's kind of the closest I've gotten to writing that way. But I'd like to do more of it. I actually really like the collaborative side of writing. I think what's interesting with a screenplay is that you're creating a blueprint for then actors and a director and a cinematographer and everybody to come to. And when you create an audio piece, you're writing with the idea that somebody's going to perform it. And I think that's actually kind of fun.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so there may be more opportunities there. There are more and more people publishing just for audio now, which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. Have you ever thought about like directing or actually, have you gone on stage since that audition?
I have.
That's cool.
Yes, I have. I never felt comfortable on stage. I always felt like I was in the wrong place. And I also, because I do prefer the specificity of film and TV, that like by show 3 in a stage run, I'm like, aren't we done?
Yeah.
You know, like the show's over, right? They're like, no, 8 more weeks.
Yeah.
I'm like, what?
I know.
You know, what are you talking about? Directing, I directed that short, but I directed kind of by default. I actually did want somebody else to direct it, and I just wanted to be in it. But it was only a 3-day shoot, and it was kind of hard to organize. So at the end, I was kind of like, I'll just do it myself. I'll just direct this. I found that very difficult to be both behind the camera and in front of the camera and sort of managing. It was a short film, so we didn't have a big budget, as you can imagine. So I was trying to manage everybody. You're worried about the catering. You're worried, it's like, it was a lot, even just for those 3 days. And I have to say, I didn't love the process so much that I was thinking, I got to make another movie. We went through the edit process. I was fortunate that it went to Sundance. It went to some other film festivals. That was great. But I wasn't so passionate and crazy about it that I was like, I've got to make another movie.
Yeah. Is it just there's so much to worry about? And I don't know how people do, like you mentioned, like I know yours is a short, but directing and acting, that's got to be kind of hard. God. Like, I don't know.
I think it is. I mean, hats off to people who do it. The people who have, the Clint Eastwoods of the world who do it, who have, obviously big budgets and all kinds of help. But the people who do it on a kind of independent level, that's hard. But I think it's like, just because you're an actor doesn't necessarily mean you want to direct things. No more than you want to write things. And it's no different than saying like, oh, you're a creative person. Why don't you paint?
Yeah.
So I don't really love painting. It's just not my thing. And I think it's important for people to try different roles. It's good to direct, it's good to write, and it's good for directors to act and see what that's all about.
Yeah.
But, if it's not for you, then just walk away from it.
No, but it's good to try it. I just felt like a Clint Eastwood, like I've interviewed a few people that worked with him just because he's done that, like being just the actor. He knows how to deal with the actors to give them the opportunity. I helped an actor write a book, Larry Hankin, and he was in Escape from Alcatraz, and he talked about how great for that to be his first, because he was an improv comedian and a stand-up comic, and he just somehow got the role of Escape from Alcatraz. He went for the audition. He thought it was the guy who was supposed to be a redhead, and somehow he got the role. Right. So then it was like the big thing for him was he was just before that. I think he was on Laverne and Shirley and stuff like that. But he just was like, man, it's you never know.
It's so he's on Laverne and Shirley. He thinks the part's for a redhead, and he suddenly is in the Escape from Alcatraz.
He lived on the island, like when they had to go over. But
that's crazy.
Just some cool stories about just the way Clint would be like. He would, even at that point, he wasn't directing yet, but he was directing.
Right.
He would basically be like, all right, that was a good take. I'm done with it. And then it'd be like, all right, let's go to the next scene,
I've heard that about him. I've never worked with him, but I've heard that he's very just like, all right, do it, cut,
Yeah.
go, move
Yeah.
on. So you as an actor probably need to know that you need to be prepared and
Yeah.
ready to deliver.
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get 10 takes.
No, you won't. And Larry messed
So-
with him, just try to bust it because they were like busting each other's balls. And in one scene,
Yeah.
Clint goes, "All right, that's good. Let's go to the next shot." And then Larry goes, "Yeah, I didn't really like that take." He's just started walking away to start the scene again. But no, it's cool
Right.
when those are the cool stories about not old Hollywood, but just the way movies were
It is
made.
now.
Not saying
Yeah.
the way things done are different now, but they are. Like there's a lot more involved, I guess.
I think, movies generally have become more of a cinematographer and editor's medium.
Yeah.
If you look at old movies and you look at how like a take would go on for a minute and a half, they're basically filming stage actors. And then now if you look at a film, I mean, edits are so fast. And it's so much about the composition and the shot. And I don't mean to take away from actors, but I do feel like actors are being helped in ways that they weren't helped before. Like if you couldn't sustain a scene back in the day, and I'm way back.
Yeah.
We can talk like Jimmy Stewart way back, right? If you couldn't do that, you weren't going to be in movies. But now, if you can provide what the camera needs in small pieces, then they can put it together around that.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very different art.
Agreed.
And I think I feel like a lot of the skill of acting these days is being able to live and work on a set and manage a lifestyle of 14-hour days, 16-hour days, working for weeks, months, locations, like all that kind of stuff. That feels like as much a part of the job as, again, go back to the Jimmy Stewart days. They were on a soundstage in Burbank. They probably showed up at 9 a.m. and were done by 5.
Yeah.
And they would just shoot long takes, and that was the job. It's a very different job now. And I do feel like the technology is really helping performers. I mean, you think about what they can do with making people look a certain
Oh, I know.
way. There's always been lighting and makeup, but there hasn't been what we have now.
Yeah, I know.
I mean, it's pretty astonishing.
It's scary. My buddy works,
So-
he edits commercials. Like a few years ago, like 10 years ago now, I was in between jobs and I'm like, this might be fun. I've always wanted to do stuff with like TV, film. Maybe it's like my foot in the door. And he was working on, like, I think it was a Viagra commercial. And they were, the actress they hired, they wanted her eyes to me look like perfect. Like you look at her like, oh, those
They
are two
wanted them
eyes.
bigger or something.
Yes,
right?
one was like a tiny bit. So he had to go and like in every frame to make it perfect.
Right.
But I totally agree. I think it's almost like that, I guess you can call it like the TikTok syndrome or something, because the speed of what people their attention spans aren't as long. So think about a movie now, like you said, so many quick cuts. You don't see those long scenes as much. Maybe an Oppenheimer, bigger, different directors will do it. But for Marvel, you're just like, your head is like on a swivel.
Yeah. It's funny. There was, I have a 12-year-old son. And so we went through all the Marvel movies at one point, and I enjoyed them. I really did. But there were times when I was like, wow, this is moving fast and this is so big. And I remember that there was always a point or two in every film, somewhat formulaic, but bless them, where somebody would have a speech, right? There'd be that quiet moment, usually somebody looking out over kind of like a wasteland or something, and they would have a speech. And everything got very slow, and there weren't as many edits. And it always jumped out at me in the movies because it felt so different from the rest of the film. And there, the actor would actually have to prove his or her worth, right? It's like, can you actually carry this minute by yourself, right? With no help, maybe some music in the background, but it's basically just you, your face, a bunch of words, go.
Yeah.
And it was so different from the rest of the film. So maybe they still have to find those actors who are capable of that.
And then each person they go to, and they have their little head nod or like some emotional
Exactly.
thing.
Right.
So,
yes,
so people not
Right,
speaking have
right.
to have their their emotional. They have to show their emotional acting chops.
But I remember early on, going back all the way to the Pest and Substitute 2 and stuff, I remember learning about life on set and what that was like. And, there were long days, and there were days when you'd, get called in at whatever, 6 a.m. and you wouldn't shoot until 3 p.m. or something. And as a young actor, I didn't quite understand it. I was like, oh, why can't they be better organized? Why couldn't they call me in at, 1 o'clock? And then you realize that's just the way movies are made, right? They have so many moving parts. They have to call X, Y, and Z in early. And I remember, those experiences were very important to me because I learned what it was like. And you learn early on, like, is this going to be a life that you think you can sustain? And some people can't. They can't deal with the lifestyle of it. And beyond the lifestyle of wondering when your next job is and all that kind of stuff. It's just the actual lifestyle on set. It's very specific. And then you have this kind of camaraderie with the cast and the crew. And, if you're on location, especially, you tend to go out together at restaurants, bars, whatever. And then after a few months, it's over.
Yeah.
And you all kind of go your separate ways. And some people you'll see again. Most you won't. I was doing a quick little PSA in Los Angeles earlier this year. And the makeup woman, I hadn't worked with her in 20 years. But there she was, I was like, oh my God, So sometimes you cross paths again, but often you don't. And so that too plays into the sort of lifestyle of it. Are you willing to create these little families every few months and live with them for a while and then walk away? And it's a very specific way to live.
No, it's hard. Yeah, no, that's one thing Larry would talk about is just, you felt like you were like in a summer camp. And you're all getting to know each other. And then when it was over, he said it was like really hard.
Right.
Like he worked with John Ashton on in She's Having a Baby, the John Hughes movie. And they were like the neighbors and they were like buddies the whole movie. And he was like, I love talking to that guy. And I never ran into him again. Like just being in Hollywood, just never saw him again.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a high school graduation after every film, right? It's like your buddies that you're like friends forever, and they're like, no, not
we're
so
never
much.
Gonna see you again.
Yeah, no.
So one thing I love asking people is, in your career, like when you started, did you ever have the wherewithal? Because sometimes you don't think about like what's an important moment or what's an important like keepsake. Did you keep anything from the earlier times, like like any scripts or wardrobe or anything?
Yeah, that's funny. I wish I had. My honest answer is I don't have a lot of that stuff. I have a few of what I guess they're called chairbacks.
Yeah.
The director's chairs, the folding chairs. Okay, so when you're a part of the principal cast, they make one specifically for you. And it either has your name or your character name, and then it has the name of the movie on the back. I've kept a few of those. Which I think are kind of fun.
Yeah.
And I have a few pieces of wardrobe from films over the years, but it's not like I, was in some movie where the wardrobe was outrageous, so it'd be like just a shirt. So you wouldn't know it happened to be in the movie. It's funny. For a brief period, I took a bunch of pictures when I was on sets. And again, we're going back. So this is when you bought film, right? And you had to develop the film. And so I have a bunch of pictures, but not as many as I would like. I don't have any scripts. That's a great question.
Yeah.
I do remember there was the tradition. I don't know if it's still a tradition. Back in the days, you would get everybody to sign the cover of your script.
Yeah, I've talked to people that do that. Yeah.
And I remember doing it, but I don't have it anymore. I remember last day of filming, I was like, oh, everybody signed my script. It's like your yearbook, right? Everybody signed my script, signed my script. They're like, oh, this is great. I don't know where they are now. So no, I haven't been great about that. I guess mostly I've just taken the experience and the memories of it.
Sometimes you just don't think about it. Like, that's so cool. Like getting everybody to sign your script, keeping that. But then I talked to Stuart Penkin and I asked him the same question. I was like, you're keeping these scripts? And he looked off to the right. And I'm like, what are you looking at? He goes, I'm looking at a closet. Inside that closet has a script from every movie I made. And he goes, you know what?
Wow.
I'm going to pick the kid that I don't like that has to take care of that because I don't want to have to I do nothing with it. I kept it I do
That's
nothing with it.
Well, yeah, I know. Yeah, that's amazing. No, there are. There are a few things I wish I'd sort of kept, um, but no, I don't. I actually don't have much of that. So
Yeah, just sometimes you just don't think about it. Like you said, you took in the experience, you had that moment.
I took in the experience, right? And now it's, obviously we live in the digital cell phone age, and everybody's taking pictures and movies of everything. I don't even do that as much. I mean, I was just in a show 2 years ago. I filmed for on and off for months, and I don't have a whole lot of pictures from it. I don't know why. I've never been very good about that.
Yeah. And again, it's more stuff.
So
it'd be more stuff that you'd have to move
yeah, I
around.
mean, in the digital version.
Oh no, the digital version.
In the digital
totally,
version,
yeah.
it's just up on the cloud,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Right.
But like for back in the
but no,
day,
this-
just to take things from a set, and then you're like, all right, where am I going to put this? And then,
Right. I know. It's funny you mentioned the scripts. I'd sort of forgotten about that was a thing. You'd have everybody sign your script.
Yeah.
And I did it for several movies, and I have no idea where those are.
Do you still get
Lost them in
scripts?
some move.
Like when you were in the murder
Well,
end
it's
of the
all
world?
PDFs.
Yeah, I know.
It's all PDFs. Yeah. So there's right. There's no physical script. Yeah. So it's a different
Sign
thing.
the PDF. They can just use their finger and sign on the PDF on your computer.
Right. Or there's got to be. I'm blanking now. The digital signatures. Anyway, there are ways to do digital signatures, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like only tied to you, right? It's almost like Bitcoin, right? But it's this idea that you have this like blockchain, which is yours,
Yeah.
and so I'll get people to put that on my PDF.
So back, one quick question, and then I'll just have one more, and then thanks so much for taking the time. So when it comes
That's
to
fun.
the audiobooks, how did that first start? Like, who was did somebody hear you just working on set and saying like, wow, you have a great voice. Would you do this?
No, so it was a woman who was a commercial voice casting director that I knew in LA, and I think I mentioned it was right around the time when Audible launched, the iPhone launched, so it was kind of happening. And she had this idea to launch an audiobook production company. It was very early. And so she asked me, would I be interested in doing one? And I was like, sure. And she was like, it just has to be public domain because I can't go out and get the rights to it. And I was like, fine, whatever. So I picked one, and I literally recorded in a closet. But I kind of enjoyed it. I was like, I like books. I like reading. I like, acting. It's a kind of marriage of those things. And then it kind of just took off from there. But she, I think, asked me because it was right after The Sopranos had aired, my episodes anyway. And I think she was like, oh, well, let me see if I can get this guy to do a book. It'll help me kind of sell, this sort of package of actors. She wanted to get like 50 actors to do books and just have them. So I was one of the ones she asked. And kind of random, a bit random, but I just enjoyed it. And it really, then I didn't do anything with it for a few years, but then it really sort of took off and became most of my work to this day. I mean, I did the series, but I still do a lot more recordings than working on sets.
Who are some of the authors? Like, who are some of the people?
Well, I mean, there's some huge authors. I just did like the John Grisham, it was the sequel to The Firm. That was that book that just came out. I did that. I've done like Baldacci and Patterson. I've done a lot of spiritual books. I did some by the Dalai Lama. And then I do some classics. I've done, Dostoevsky and Camus and all these, people that you had to read in high school. And then some best-selling newer authors. I don't know if the names will mean anything to you, but people like Amor Towles, Richard Powers, Jess Walter. These are, sort of big best-selling authors. So it's a range of things. And yeah, I've enjoyed it a lot. It's and I do it all in this room.
Yeah, no, in the old wine room, use it for something that can make you money instead of storing old bottles of wine that people do for years upon years.
Turn to vinegar.
Yeah,
right.
So how about your parents? What did they think about the acting career? Like, because you said they were academics.
Yes, my parents are academics. Both university professors. I think when I first said I want to be an actor, I think their jaws hit the floor and they were like, what? Why? And yeah, I don't blame them exactly. It's kind of came out of left
Yeah.
field. And then, they saw me have enough success in it. And I think the audiobook stuff has been interesting because it kind of brings it back to the literary side, slightly more academic. So it kind of marries the two worlds. And so it kind of, it's come to that point where I think they're like, oh, I get it.
All right. I get it now. He's
yeah.
got it. But Mom, Dad, don't watch The Pest. No.
I think they have.
I'm sure.
Yeah. I'm sure they did.
You
Yeah.
try to warn them about what you're about to say, but no, that's awesome. And now, since
I remember when it came out, it was in theaters, and they were
yeah.
like, "Oh, I want to go see it," and I was like, "Go ahead." I was like, "It's way over the top. I don't think it's going to be your kind of thing, but go ahead."
Yeah.
So.
And now, like, obviously, you said like people are reaching out to you. It's not like you're actively like, "Hey, I want to be in TV, film right now." Is there a particular role that you'd want to play, or a type of character that you've never had the opportunity to play?
I don't know why, but I've always wanted to play a priest.
A priest.
I don't know why. I just always thought that'd be an interesting character.
Yeah.
I'm not a religious person. I wasn't raised in a religious household. I am Italian and have spent a lot of time in Italy, where obviously the church is a formidable force. But I've always just thought it would be an interesting character, somebody who lives a life of sort of spirituality, but also has to kind of deal with, everyday people. And if there was some kind of dramatic story there, that it would be a very interesting angle to come at. But I've never been cast as a priest, so we'll see.
A New York priest.
Maybe somebody hearing this will be like, I got the script.
A New York priest that at night, during the day, he's helping out the community. During night, he's taking care of bad guys.
There you go. I think that's our $1 million idea.
That is the $1 million idea. But no, I always, whenever I talk to actors, I always, for some reason, forget to ask that question. I've only asked it a handful of times because for the most part, it's like, here, I'm reading this role. And this is the role that they think that I should. I asked Eric Roberts, and because he has like 600 plus credits, without a hesitation, he just like snapped into it. He's like, I'd like to play a transvestite lawyer. Like without even.
That's very specific.
Like, whoa. Yeah. He was like really.
Okay. I could see him in that role. I could see him.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why not?
No, he can do it all. No.
He could do it. Yeah, he could absolutely do it. He's got the right face for it. He's got the right sort of energy for it. Absolutely. But yeah, just a priest for me. No transvestite
just a
lawyers.
priest.
Just a priest.
This has been a lot of fun.
Although, if there's a movie with a transvestite lawyer who has to go
help the priest out, that's the sequel. Gets him out of prison, and then they start taking on everybody together.
I see where this show is going. Now we're starting to spitball ideas.
It's like the canon movies of the 80s. It's like, how can we take a movie that's out there already and just change it? Or like a Roger Corman idea. It's like, oh, this movie's used.
This is good.
Let's make this other movie. It's like when Jurassic Park came out and people were like, let's make the same movie, have a similar name, and try to get out there before it. And then it's going to look nothing like The Room.
All right. Well, you, me, and Eric Roberts, we're going to make this movie. Yes. I can feel it,
man.
I can feel it.
I'm so happy we connected. This is really cool.
This is great.
You're an awesome guy. You're so for the audiobooks. It obviously makes sense. Just very even keel. Are you always like that?
I try to be.
Yeah.
I don't go too high and too low, I guess. I have also learned I have kids who are still on the younger side. So I have learned to kind of even myself out as much as possible.
Because if not, then they're going to do that roller coaster emotions. Yeah, I'm at 5.5.
Which they're doing anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, my son.
No, mine are 12 and 9.
Is it girl and girl or?
Older boy, younger girl.
Okay, so my daughter's older, my son. My daughter was an angel. And she's turning into like a teenager, but my son,
you wait.
Yeah. But my son, oh my gosh, I think his daily thing when he wakes up, he thinks, can I break this? Everything. Or can I climb this? He tries to climb everything.
Well, it might be a healthy impulse.
No, it could be.
So just make sure everything's
just don't
safe.
break the TV.
So
that's all I ask him.
Right. Not the TV, because we got to watch the movie.
Yes, we did. The sequels.
Right.
Thank you so much, Eduardo.
Right.
This is a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Man, Eduardo, man, it's so many cool stories, right? Especially the fact that he goes for like a Shakespeare audition and he thinks he's just getting called in for the Pest. And it's like, yeah, okay, just getting called in for the Pest, you know? And he walks in as John Leguizamo. Like, this is like, he was deep in the interview process just from that. So, man, it's so much fun. Love talking to him. The guy just, and his calmness, his voice, it's very soothing. No wonder why I'm going to start listening to some of the audiobooks. Maybe like we talked about the sequels, which he had some great theories on sequels now versus back in the day in the 80s and 90s. But, and also renting. I love that he said that when you rented a movie back in the day, you finished that movie. Even if it stunk, you didn't turn it off 15 minutes in. That was your movie for the night. All the movies that you had in your VHS library at home, you've watched it a million times. This new thing you like have to watch. So maybe that's why there's so many of these sequels that are just stuck into my brain forever. And I watched them 30 years later for the first time for the podcast in years. And it's like, oh, I know every word somehow. It's because it was probably one of the 45 VHS tapes that we had. So yeah, thank you, Eduardo. Now your homework, school's out. Substitute 2, baby. Wow. This is going to be so much fun. I can't wait for Jamie to see Treat Williams in this. He's played badass roles before, but man, this is different. You're going to love it. And I think it's free on Tubi or Pluto. It's one of those. I just watched it like 2-3 months ago. So, and not even prepping it for this. Just like, oh man, I love this one. So don't forget to review, rate, share our podcast. Follow us on all social media at Sequels Only. And don't forget to check out our website, sequelsonly.com. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, guys.